I stared at my phone screen, my hands trembling as I read the message for the third time. The family group chat that I'd been part of for 2 years suddenly felt like a courtroom where I was the defendant and my own mother was the prosecutor. "It's best to remove Natalie from the group," she had typed, as casually as if she were suggesting what to have for dinner. "She's always stirring up drama and making everyone uncomfortable." The words hit me like a physical blow, each letter burning into my retina as I tried to process what I was seeing. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who supposedly loved me unconditionally, was actively campaigning for my exclusion from our family's digital space. The worst part wasn't just her suggestion. It was watching the little heart emojis and thumbs-up reactions appear one by one under her message. Aunt Sarah was the first to like it, followed by my cousin Mike, then Uncle Robert. Even my younger brother Dylan, who I thought would at least stay neutral, added his approval with a laughing emoji. I felt my chest tighten as I counted them. 7 family members had endorsed my mother's proposal to erase me from their conversations. 7 people who shared my blood, who had sat around Thanksgiving tables with me, who had watched me grow up, all agreeing that I was better off gone. The silence in my San Diego apartment became deafening as I realized I was witnessing my own digital exile in real time. My mind raced back to the argument that had started this whole mess 3 days ago. I had simply questioned why nobody had told me about my grandmother's doctor's appointment, pointing out that I lived only 20 minutes away and could have driven her myself. Instead, I found out through a casual mention in the group chat that she had already been and received concerning news about her heart condition. When I expressed hurt about being left out of something so important, my mother had immediately gone on the defensive, claiming I was always making everything about myself and creating problems where none existed. The conversation had escalated quickly, with other family members chiming in to support her version of events, painting me as the dramatic troublemaker who couldn't handle simple family communication. I screenshot the conversation before anyone could delete it, my fingers shaking as I pressed the buttons. Something deep inside me knew this moment would be important later, that I would need proof of what had just happened. The image captured everything: my mother's cold suggestion, the enthusiastic agreement from my relatives, and the timestamp showing it was 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when my family decided I was expendable. I saved it to my photos, where it sat like a digital scar among pictures of happier times. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was documenting my own rejection, creating evidence of the moment my family chose to abandon me in the most modern way possible. As I sat there in my living room, surrounded by the silence of my empty apartment, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but underneath it was growing something else, a cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. They thought they could just erase me, delete me from their lives like I was spam in their inbox, but they had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just some random family member they could dispose of without consequences. I had secrets, knowledge about our family that they had trusted me with over the years, assuming I would always be on their side. My mother especially had confided in me about things that would destroy her carefully crafted image if they ever came to light. The screenshot felt heavy in my phone, like it was burning a hole through the device and into my palm. I knew exactly who I needed to show it to, someone who would understand the full weight of what my family had just done. Someone who had been waiting for years for proof of exactly this kind of behavior. My fingers hovered over my contacts list, scrolling until I found the name I was looking for. The person who had been cut out of our family long before me, who had tried to warn me about the toxic dynamics I was too naive to see. The person my mother had specifically forbidden me from contacting, claiming they were poison and would fill my head with lies about our family. I opened a new message thread, my heart pounding as I attached the screenshot. This wasn't just about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. This was about justice, about finally having proof of what I'd suspected for years, that my family's love was conditional, performative, and could be revoked the moment I stopped playing by their rules. The person I was about to contact had been trying to tell me this for years, but I had been too loyal, too hopeful that things would change. Now I had the evidence they needed, the smoking gun that would validate everything they had tried to warn me about. My thumb hovered over the send button as I realized I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. The message sent with a soft whoosh sound that seemed to echo in my empty apartment. There was no taking it back now. I had just shared my family's private conversation with the one person they had explicitly told me never to trust. But as I watched the screenshot disappear into the digital ether, heading toward someone who would know exactly what to do with it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the victim of my family's manipulation. I wasn't the scapegoat they could blame for every problem or the emotional punching bag they could abuse whenever they needed to feel better about themselves. I was the one holding the cards now, and they had no idea what was coming their way. The response came faster than I expected. My phone buzzed just 20 minutes after I'd sent the screenshot, and I nearly dropped it when I saw who was calling. Natalie? The voice on the other end was cautious but warm, tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. It was my Aunt Linda, my mother's estranged sister, who had been exiled from family gatherings 5 years ago after what my mother called the incident. I had been forbidden from maintaining contact with her, told repeatedly that she was manipulative and dangerous, someone who would poison my mind against the family. But sitting here with proof of my own exile, those warnings felt hollow and self-serving. Linda had been cast out for questioning my mother's behavior, for refusing to enable her need for control, and now I was following the same path. "I can't believe she actually put it in writing," Linda said, after I confirmed that yes, the screenshot was real, and yes, my own mother had suggested removing me from the family group. Her voice carried a mixture of vindication and sadness that made my chest ache. "Natalie, honey, I've been waiting 5 years for someone else in the family to see what I saw. Your mother has been doing this for decades, isolating anyone who questions her, turning the family against whoever threatens her position as the matriarch." She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. "I tried to protect you from this when you were younger, but she made sure I couldn't get close enough to warn you properly. She painted me as the villain so effectively that even you believed her stories about me." As Linda spoke, memories I had buried began surfacing like debris after a storm. I remembered how close Linda and I used to be when I was a teenager, how she would take me shopping and listen to my problems without judgment. I remembered the sudden shift when I turned 18, how my mother began making subtle comments about Linda's jealousy and inappropriate behavior, the way family gatherings became tense whenever Linda's name was mentioned, how my mother would get that particular look in her eyes, the one that meant someone was about to be systematically destroyed. I had watched it happen to others over the years, but I never thought I would be next. I had been the good daughter, the one who followed the rules and kept the peace, but apparently even that wasn't enough to protect me from my mother's need to control the narrative. "She did the same thing to your cousin Rachel 10 years ago, Linda continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Rachel questioned why your mother was handling your grandmother's finances without any oversight, and suddenly she was causing family drama and being disrespectful. Within 6 months, Rachel was completely cut off from everyone. Your mother convinced the whole family that Rachel was trying to steal from Grandma, when really she was just concerned about the lack of transparency. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture I had been too close to see clearly. Rachel's sudden absence from family events, the way her name became taboo, how my mother would change the subject whenever someone asked about her. I had accepted the official story without question, trusting that my mother's version of events was the truth. Linda's revelation hit me like a physical blow, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overly sensitive, and I wasn't the problem child my mother had convinced everyone I was. This was a pattern, a systematic method of maintaining control by eliminating anyone who dared to challenge the established order. "There are others too," Linda said quietly. "Your Uncle Mark, your cousin Jennifer, even your father's brother Tom. They've all been pushed out over the years for various offenses that really boiled down to not falling in line with your mother's expectations." I thought about all the family members who had mysteriously disappeared from our lives, people I had been told were difficult or toxic or just couldn't handle being part of a close family. Now I understood they had all committed the same crime I had. They had questioned my mother's authority. The weight of this knowledge settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and enlightening at the same time. I had spent years trying to be the perfect daughter, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering my mother's wrath, believing that if I just tried harder, loved more unconditionally, sacrificed more of myself, I could earn the kind of love that couldn't be revoked. But now I understood that no amount of compliance would ever be enough, because the problem wasn't my behavior. It was my mother's need to maintain absolute control over every relationship in her orbit. Anyone who showed signs of independent thinking, who questioned her decisions or challenged her narrative, was marked for elimination. I had just been naive enough to think my status as her daughter would protect me from the same fate that had befallen so many others. "What are you going to do with the screenshot?" Linda asked, and I could hear the careful hope in her voice. She knew, as I was beginning to understand, that this wasn't just about my personal hurt feelings. This was about exposing a pattern of abuse that had been hidden behind the facade of family loyalty for decades. The screenshot wasn't just evidence of my mother's cruelty. It was proof of the family's complicity in her systematic elimination of anyone who threatened her control. Every heart emoji, every thumbs up, every laughing reaction was documentation of their willingness to participate in emotional abuse as long as it wasn't directed at them. They had all watched others be cast out over the years, and instead of questioning the pattern, they had simply been grateful it wasn't their turn. As I stared at the screenshot on my phone, I realized I was holding more than just proof of my own rejection. I was holding the key to unraveling years of carefully constructed lies. The evidence that could finally expose my mother's manipulation for what it really was. The question wasn't whether I should use it. The question was how far I was willing to go to make sure this never happened to anyone else in our family again. Linda was waiting for my answer, and I could feel the weight of all the other exiled family members waiting too, hoping that finally someone would have the courage to speak the truth that had been silenced for so long. The screenshot felt like a weapon in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to use it. 3 days passed before I worked up the courage to do what Linda had suggested. "You need to send it to everyone," she had said during our second phone call. "Not just the family members who are still in the group, but all of us who have been cast out over the years. Rachel, Mark, Jennifer, Tom, they all deserve to see this. They deserve to know that what happened to them is still happening, that nothing has changed." The idea terrified me, but it also felt like the right thing to do. These people had been painted as villains in our family's story, their reputations destroyed by carefully crafted narratives that I now understood were complete fabrications. They deserved to see proof that they weren't the problem, that the pattern of abuse had continued long after their exile. I started with Rachel, my cousin, who had been erased from family history 10 years ago. Finding her contact information took some detective work, but social media made it easier than I expected. When I sent her the screenshot along with a message explaining what had happened, her response came within hours. "Natalie, I've been waiting a decade for someone to see what I saw," she wrote back. "Your mother destroyed my relationship with my own grandmother, convinced everyone I was trying to steal from her when I was actually trying to protect her from financial abuse. I lost my entire family because I asked questions about missing money from Grandma's accounts." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer because I suddenly remembered how my mother had taken over all of my grandmother's financial affairs around that same time, claiming it was too much stress for an elderly woman to handle. The responses kept coming as I reached out to each exiled family member. Uncle Mark had been cast out for questioning why my mother was making medical decisions for my grandfather without consulting the rest of the family. Jennifer had been eliminated for suggesting that my mother's constant criticism of her parenting was inappropriate and harmful. Tom had been pushed out for refusing to lend my mother money for what he suspected was a gambling problem. Each story followed the same pattern. Someone would notice concerning behavior, ask reasonable questions, and then find themselves systematically isolated and demonized until they had no choice but to walk away from the family entirely. My mother had been running the same playbook for decades, and I had been too blind to see it. But it was Tom's response that shook me to my core. "Your mother has a serious gambling addiction that she's been hiding for years," he wrote. "She's been stealing money from family members, including your grandmother, to fund her casino trips. When I confronted her about it 5 years ago, she turned the whole family against me, claiming I was spreading lies because I was jealous of her success." He attached bank statements and casino receipts that he had kept as evidence, documentation of thousands of dollars in losses, and suspicious transfers from my grandmother's account. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed suddenly clicked into place. My mother's mysterious business trips to Las Vegas, her defensive reactions whenever anyone asked about finances, the way she had isolated anyone who might have access to information about money. I felt sick as I realized how deep the deception went. My grandmother, who I thought was being lovingly cared for by my devoted mother, was actually being financially exploited by her own daughter. The woman I had admired for her dedication to family was actually a predator who had been systematically stealing from the most vulnerable member of our family while simultaneously destroying anyone who tried to expose her. The screenshot I had taken in a moment of hurt and anger was revealing something much darker than simple family dysfunction. It was exposing criminal behavior that had been hidden behind a facade of maternal devotion for years. Linda called me that evening after I had shared Tom's evidence with her. "Now you understand why she had to get rid of all of us," she said, her voice heavy with years of suppressed anger. "We were getting too close to the truth. Each of us had pieces of the puzzle, but she made sure we could never compare notes by turning us against each other and cutting us off from the family. She's been playing a long game, Natalie, systematically eliminating anyone who might expose her while maintaining her image as the perfect daughter and mother." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. My mother hadn't just been controlling family dynamics. She had been orchestrating an elaborate cover-up of financial abuse that had been going on for years. As I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by printouts of bank statements and casino receipts, I realized I was no longer just dealing with hurt feelings about being excluded from a family group chat. I was sitting on evidence of elder abuse and financial fraud, documentation that could send my mother to prison and finally give my grandmother the protection she needed. The screenshot that had started this whole investigation was just the tip of an iceberg that went much deeper than I had ever imagined. My mother's suggestion to remove me from the family group wasn't just cruel, it was strategic, an attempt to silence someone who was getting too close to asking the right questions about her behavior. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I wasn't just holding evidence of my own mistreatment anymore. I was holding the key to protecting my grandmother and potentially recovering thousands of dollars that had been stolen from her. But I also knew that using this evidence would destroy my family as I had known it, would expose secrets that would send shockwaves through our entire extended family network. My mother would likely face criminal charges. My grandmother would be devastated to learn the truth about her daughter's betrayal, and the family members who had enabled this behavior would have to confront their own complicity in the abuse. The screenshot I had taken in anger was about to become the catalyst for the complete destruction of everything I had once called family, and I was the only one who could decide whether to pull that trigger. The confrontation happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after my mother had suggested removing me from the family group. I had spent sleepless nights weighing my options, but ultimately, I knew I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while my grandmother continued to be victimized. I drove to my mother's house in Hillcrest, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. In my purse was a folder containing printouts of everything: the original screenshot, Tom's bank statements, the casino receipts, and a timeline I had constructed showing the pattern of financial abuse going back 5 years. I had also contacted Adult Protective Services and scheduled a meeting for the following day, but I wanted to give my mother one chance to explain herself before I involved the authorities. She answered the door with her usual bright smile, the same expression she wore when she was about to manipulate someone into doing what she wanted. "Natalie, what a surprise. I was just thinking about you." The casual tone, the way she acted like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just orchestrated my exile from the family. It was so typical of her that I almost laughed. She had always been able to compartmentalize her cruelty, to switch between loving mother and calculating manipulator without missing a beat. But today, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Today, I was armed with the truth, and I was finally ready to use it. I pushed past her into the living room, ignoring her confused protests, and spread the evidence across her coffee table like I was dealing cards in a poker game. "We need to talk about Grandma's money," I said, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition or guilt. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. But she recovered quickly, putting on her best wounded mother expression. "Natalie, honey, what are you talking about? You're scaring me. Is this about that silly argument in the group chat?" Because I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how dramatic you can get when you're upset. She was already trying to gaslight me, to make me question my own perceptions and doubt the evidence sitting right in front of us. It was such a familiar pattern that I felt a surge of anger at how many times I had fallen for this exact manipulation in the past. I picked up Tom's bank statements and held them out to her. Explain these transfers from Grandma's account to your personal checking account. Explain why you've been taking thousands of dollars from an 80-year-old woman who trusts you to manage her finances. Her face went pale, but she still tried to maintain her innocent act. Those are legitimate expenses for her care, Natalie. You don't understand how expensive it is to take care of an elderly person. The medications, the doctor visits, the home modifications, it all adds up. But I was ready for that excuse too. I pulled out the casino receipts, the ones that showed her gambling away more money in a single weekend than my grandmother spent on medications in 6 months. Then explain these. Explain why Grandma's medical expenses are being spent at the Sicuan casino. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face cycle through a range of emotions: denial, anger, desperation, and finally, a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. When she spoke again, her voice was different, stripped of all pretense and warmth. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Natalie. You think you're so smart, playing detective, but you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. The threat was implicit but clear. Cross me, and you'll end up like all the others who have been cast out. But I wasn't the naive, desperate for approval daughter I had been a week ago. I had seen behind the curtain, understood the machinery of manipulation that had controlled my family for decades, and I was no longer afraid of her disapproval. I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I understand that you've been stealing from your own mother while destroying anyone who got close to figuring it out. I understand that Rachel, Tom, Mark, Jennifer, and Linda were all telling the truth about you, and you systematically destroyed their relationships with the family to protect your secret. I understand that you suggested removing me from the group chat because I was starting to ask the same kinds of questions that got them exiled. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot that had started this whole investigation. But you made one mistake, Mom. You put it in writing this time, and I shared it with all the people you tried to silence. They've been comparing notes, and now we have the whole picture. The mask came off completely then, and I saw my mother for who she really was. Not the devoted daughter and loving mother she pretended to be, but a calculating predator who had been systematically abusing the people who trusted her most. You ungrateful little bitch, she hissed, her voice filled with a venom I had never heard before. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By believing lies from people who are jealous of our family's success? She was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me doubt what I knew to be true, but her words had lost their power over me. I had heard the same accusations leveled at every family member who had dared to question her, and I finally understood that they were just weapons she used to maintain control. I stood up and gathered the evidence from her coffee table, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services, I told her, watching her face crumple as the reality of her situation hit her. They're opening an investigation tomorrow. I've also been in touch with Grandma's bank, and they're reviewing all the transactions from her accounts over the past 5 years. The casino has records too, Mom. There's a paper trail that leads directly back to you. I headed toward the door, but turned back one last time to look at the woman who had given birth to me, who had shaped my understanding of love and family, who had taught me that affection was conditional and could be revoked at any moment. You were right about one thing, though. It is best to remove me from the family, but not for the reasons you thought. 6 months later, I sat in my grandmother's living room, watching her sort through old photo albums with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. The investigation had moved quickly once Adult Protective Services got involved, and my mother was now facing multiple felony charges for elder abuse and financial fraud. Over $80,000 had been recovered from various accounts and returned to my grandmother, money that would ensure she could afford proper care for the rest of her life. The family group chat had been disbanded, but a new one had formed, one that included all the exiled members who had been proven right about my mother's behavior. Dylan had been the first to reach out after the truth came out, apologizing through tears for not believing me sooner. I was so scared of ending up like the others, that I just went along with whatever Mom said, he confessed, during one of our weekly coffee meetings. The rest of the family had been forced to confront their own complicity in the abuse, and while some relationships would never recover, others were slowly healing. Rachel had reconnected with our grandmother. Tom was helping manage her finances properly, and Linda had become the family matriarch my mother had pretended to be. As for me, I had finally found the family I had always wanted, one built on truth instead of manipulation, support instead of control. The screenshot that had started this whole journey was now framed on my wall, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the most important revelations. My mother had been right about one thing. It was best to remove me from her version of family. But in losing her toxic love, I had gained something infinitely more valuable: the courage to demand the kind of love I actually deserved.